All right, everybody. Welcome back to another installment here on The Special Educator. I'm your host, Tom Hankins, Chief Cook and Bottle Washer at The Special Educator, instructor, tutor, consultant, and musician. Before we get going, I'm just going to leave this music on here nice and light. This is another installment on band etiquette, specifically about song selection. This is very important, and this is a good one to give you some practical advice. Before we get going, some points of business. I do have a disclaimer I have to display under the fair use doctrine that we do, at least from time to time, and in many cases, quite often, we'll use AI to help compose content for my postings here. Where to reach out to us? If you're listening, just follow along. Facebook, X, and Rumble, we are at TSEGRP. YouTube, we are TSEDGRP. Instagram and LinkedIn, we are The Special Educator. Our website, tsegrp.org. Email directly to those of us involved, host at tsegrp.org. Please, I'm going to ask you to like, share, follow, subscribe, contact, support, contribute. Anything you could do, thank you very much, because everything that you do helps us spread the word. Let's get to this. Hey, everybody. So I put out two prior postings on band etiquette. One was on auditioning. The other one is about band membership, being in a band. This one is going to be about song selection. And I think I'm going to have at least one, maybe two other episodes that I will post during the week this week. My goal is, when this series is done, have you, at least those of you that are musicians thinking about joining a band, are currently in a band, looking to add or subtract members, whatever you're going to do, I'm hoping there's some insights in here that'll help you out a little bit. Bear in mind, I'm only giving you the overview, the basics. I'm not going to do too many deep dives in here, because I want you folks to send comments and questions to me, either through comments on social media or directly at host@tsegrp.org, and that'll give me some ideas for follow-up episodes. I'd like to see that work this way. So I prepared another PowerPoint presentation on this, and let's get right to it. All right, we're going along. Selecting songs for a cover band, balancing skills, audience, and band preferences, and then crafting the ideal set list for success. Let me get right off the bat here. There's no such thing as an ideal set list. There's always compromises that have to be made. Sorry, that's just what you're going to find out. There's going to be a lot of practical advice here, and at the very end, I'll give you some ideas of what I did that changed the way that the bands I work with certainly do things. Right off the bat. So for today's agenda, we're going to base our instruction here on three principles, or if you will, three foundations to selecting songs. The first is assessing the band's musical capabilities, which I'm going to call, what songs can you play as a band? What songs can you play is about assessing the band's musical capabilities. Understanding the audience preferences is really just about, what does the audience want to hear? Seriously, what do they want to hear? Ultimately, you're there to entertain an audience. And then thirdly, incorporating the band members' interests. In other words, what do the people in the band want to play? You don't want to be miserable all night long. The point being that you take these things, what you can play, what the audience wants to hear, and what you want to play, and there's enough material out there that you can develop this on. Use a Venn diagram, use three different lists, do whatever to find a common thread eventually. But the point is, use these three filters. Use the three filters every time you go through a song selection, and you really can't go wrong, at least on selecting material. Arranging the order of the material is another art form all in and of itself. So let's start with assessing the band's musical capabilities. So I'm assuming at this point you've had auditions, or you've gotten together and you're kind of sitting around and you need to kind of think about what you want to play. It always comes up. Well, what are we going to play? Well, many times over in bands that I've been in, it always comes down to typically the same 20, 30, maybe 40 songs that everybody can agree on right off the bat. And it's usually very much similar between one bar band and the next. And you become a cliche very quickly. Just saying, that is a possibility. I'm going to try and help you avoid that. First things first. Every band member has a certain proficiency, either with an instrument or with their vocal talent. Really doesn't make any difference, but the point is you need to understand what strengths you have available amongst everybody. You need to identify those strengths, but at the same time, you want to put a little twist in this. You want to identify weaknesses. So strengths are great. Each member has those, and that does help when you want to select material, because if they have a strength, you do want to showcase those strengths within certain limits. You don't want to go crazy. For example, if you've got a person that's a shredding guitarist, you don't want to have a shredding solo every single song. It grows old fairly quick. Same thing as if you only have one singer, the singer should be diverse enough that they aren't in such a narrow range that they lack appeal. Again, they'll wear out very quickly. And then a well-structured assessment of what you have at your disposal amongst everything is really going to lead to a solid performance. Remember, before going to the next slide, your weakest link will always be your Achilles heel, so to speak. Always try and bolster up your weakest link as well as accentuate and highlight the raw talents, the real good proficiencies. Everybody gets down to this. What type of style are we going to do? Well, so many bar bands are the typical classic rock and blues. Unfortunately, that is somewhat cliche. I'm not saying it isn't entertaining or it isn't fun, but it's something that if you go to see one band one week, go to the next, and they're playing half the same songs, it's really not that great, unless there's just a totally different appeal, a stage presence or something. So the band will probably gravitate towards a certain style of play, not necessarily a genre yet. And then when you take that into consideration, you then can move on to a genre or selection of genres, plural, that really work with the band and what they have. And eventually that will develop an image and will help with your audience preferences. Now, the audience connection, it's not as easy. Choosing the right songs, obviously, is very important. But you do need to understand that you are there to perform for an audience, especially if you're a cover band. Now, I'm referring this mostly to cover bands, but this also would apply to originals. You should eventually develop an understanding of what works. Next, you also have to deal with the preparation, the types of songs that you're going to select, at least up front, and certainly as you go on as well, are going to determine how successful the rehearsals and the performances ultimately can be. You reach too far, becomes a detriment. Reach too low, become kind of boring. Song selection criteria, you want to align with your skill level and the amount of practice that you can put in. You don't want to be too complicated that you run out of practice time. This will also enhance the overall quality of the performance and members' confidence that they can actually get through something. Complexity and practice time. The complexity of the song is going to change. Now, this is a dynamic thing. All of this here changes over time as the band becomes more cohesive, becomes more familiar with the material, performs better, practices better, gets along better. But you don't want to go too far too soon. Time management ultimately is what comes into play here. I mean, I would love to play, if I did just I would love to play a whole bunch of progressive rock songs that are out there. But one, okay, takes a lot of time to work those songs up. Number two is not too many people in the audience are really going to like it. And I'm not sure if the band members are really for it anyway. Doesn't really matter what I want sometimes. My last entry, if you will, my last posting, if you will, is about band membership. And you need to understand, and I'm going to bring back a tie-in from that, is that being professional and respectful of others in the band and elsewhere, whether you're on stage, in practice, in the studio, makes no difference, is going to all go towards this. Next, we need to understand the audience. This is probably the hardest thing to do. It's not automatic. It takes a little bit of experience and patience, but it also takes a lot of awareness. You want to be aware of what's going on when you're performing. So some things that do help. Okay, understand the audiences that you're going to be performing to. Might be aligned with the type of music you like. Might be aligned specifically with the type of venues that you want to perform at. You do have to make adjustments for where you're going to play and who you're going to play to. Cultural backgrounds do sort of help. For example, you don't want to go into for example, let's say you're at a Greek restaurant and you're going to play nothing but heavy metal. Sorry, they just don't work. Culturally, they're oil and water. This does sort of help. So again, know the demographics, know the venues, know the culture that you're trying to immerse yourself in. And then you want to tailor the set list using those factors to help pare down what you want to do, what you can do, and again, ultimately hear what the audience would like. Song trends. Now, with the help of AI and searches online and things like that, you can certainly find a lot of this information out, and it's very helpful, totally different than it was before all this computer technology. But current music trends, understanding evolving interests out there will certainly help. If you want to be current, you're going to have to use the computers and AI to try and figure out what is currently the hottest stuff going out there, the most in-demand stuff. Analyze your performance requests. Now, if you're the type of band that takes requests, you have a bit of an advantage here. You can write those requests down and keep them on a list, and if it's not something you currently perform, you can note it for next time. There's a lot of ways to do this. I've tried like index cards. Here, fill it out. I've tried little composition books. Have people write down, give me the title and the artist, or the artist and title, or something about it. We'll add it. But ultimately, it's about what the audience wants in that particular case. And then finally, utilize the data that you do gather to curate set lists and constantly modify them. I will go through a technique that I used two techniques that I used over the years when I get to the end of this, just to give you some insights on that, which hopefully will help. Gathering feedback is important. Audience feedback is everything. You need to know what works and what doesn't work. You'll constantly want to interact with them. Now, I did say before in the last posting that I did about your off-stage interaction with customers. That comes back to help here. If you are not performing, you're on a set break, or you're before you get started and you're setting up, or after you're breaking down, it's not a bad idea to just listen to what the audience has to feedback. Somebody's going to come up and talk to you. They're going to want to say, oh, I really like this, or I didn't like that, or I couldn't hear this, or whatever. Point is, the audience is who you're catering to. Listen to them. Now, they might not know any better. Still, take it, say, and you can always be positive about saying, hey, I like that suggestion. Let me make a note of it. Or, if you're busy doing something, say, hey, could you write this down in this book, or on this sheet, or on this card, or whatever. Ultimately, it's about enhancing the satisfaction of the audience. Any gig that you get invited back to is usually a good sign. And if you get invited back because the audience likes you, that's one aspect. If you get back because the owners and the staff like you, that's another aspect. If you get invited back because everything went well and both sides like you, you're sitting very well. Be thankful for that. Next, band members' interests. This is probably the most sensitive part as you're starting to work up material, and as a mature band, once you're trying to prevent stagnation. This is really where things can be focused at that point. Once you're kind of in the middle and kind of cruising along, this may not be so much of an issue. So everybody has their own set of favorite tunes. There's no secret to that. Now, I myself have such a diverse musical interest. There's so many songs that, in a cover band setting, I would never be able to play. or other members would never be able to play. Just be honest with that. So just because I like something, like, for example, I might come up to a band member. I've suggested this before, and it's kind of a tease, but I'm also half serious about it. It's like, well, let's learn YYZ from Rush. I think we're talented enough at this point we could do a halfway decent version of it. But again, nobody else really wants to take the time to do it. Whether we have the talent or not is a secondary concern. But ultimately, start sharing favorite songs definitely helps people grab an identity about what you like, where you're at. Musical influences, similarly, I could say that my musical influences narrow them down to a list of, say, 3 or 4. Well, that's not fair either. But I could create a fairly extensive list of songs and bands that I really idolize. And then you want to have a diverse set list. Now, this is one of those things that if everything sounds the same or is the same, it gets boring real quick. But that doesn't mean you have to go all the way out there in left field. Unique tastes of the group and unique songs, perfectly fine. Just be careful with where you put them and how many you put in. So it all comes down to a big balancing act. So like I said, you got the 3 filters. What can the band play? What does the audience want to hear? And what does the band like to play amongst everybody? You have to balance this all out. Consensus is not easy, but it is essential. And listening above all else. So now this becomes the ultimate goal. You get the song selection down, you're enthusiastic about it. It is impactful. You have very good feedback from the audience, and the quality of your performance is really good. You're feeling really good. You're going to now be able to connect. Once the band is connected and their songs are cohesive and they got the set list worked out, you start connecting with the audience, and that's when things start to build. It is really a communication game, quite frankly. You're up there performing music, and there's body language and all this other stuff I discussed in prior posts. But ultimately, it's about getting the audience to respond to you. And it takes a while. You got to build that up. Now let's talk about creating a balanced set list. So, getting back to the 3 pillars here. You need to do an assessment of the musical capabilities of the group. You need to do an assessment of what the audience likes. Now, that is something that you can do research up front, and you also have ongoing feedback from the audience as you go on. And then band members' interests. Band members' interests are all valid. Some are not going to be productive, but some will. But all that information, laying it all out on the table helps. You need to know where everybody stands. And again, I said this in another episode, don't dismiss anything. Just because it doesn't agree or might not be productive, at least put it up there and have everybody discuss it so you can move on from it. You don't want anything lingering. Testing a set list in rehearsals. Okay, depending on how much time you have, you can do full runs through sets. You can do a full performance run, if you will. All of that takes time. Next thing is working through transitions. I am guilty of this. Every band I've been in is guilty of this. You finish a song, you stop, and you look around and try and think, well, what are we doing next? Or even if you do know what you're doing, somebody's out of tune, or somebody's not prepared, or whatever it may happen to be. These things happen. You need to work through and transition from one song to the next efficiently and effectively. Pacing and flow is one of those things that's very tough to get down. If you follow the audience, they will usually give you some indication collectively of where to go, especially if you're a band that is frequently taking requests. And again, I'll get to this in a moment when I get to the conclusion. Taking requests does help, but you have to be able to do it respectfully. And if it's something you don't know, you have to be willing to encourage that person to write it down for you somewhere and make sure that you remember it for a follow-up. Showing that you're willing to adapt is very strong at audience participation and follows. Anyway, testing your set lists is really what it's going to come down to. More than often than not, that's going to come down to practice from time to time, but it's really going to focus itself when you're on a performance. As I've said many times, the value of a live performance exceeds that of multiple practices. Just letting you know, because you can't duplicate what's going to happen in a performance during a practice. You just don't know. It's an open book sometimes. Now, based on feedback, gathering audience feedback, refining the set list, and then going out and enhancing your future performances is really the key to it. Constant revision, constant updating, constant improvement in both delivery and content is essential. It's a never-ending process, folks. I'm sorry, but that's just the way that it goes. Let me get over here to the conclusion and give you some personal information. So we talked about the 3 pillars, balancing skills and preferences, understanding the audience, and then ultimately creating a balanced set list. Let's go back to the 3 filters. What can you play? What does the audience want to hear you play? And ultimately, what do you like to play or want to play? Find enough songs that meet all 3 of those criteria and sit very well on that, and that is the best place to start. Now, I said I'd bring up some issues or some plans or some ideas or methods that I used or we used at different bands I've been in. One of the most interesting changes came when I was with the 3 Fat Cats. There were a lot of hurdles to get over in order for the 3 Fat Cats to start performing. One of them was volume control. Well, we figured out that that was best handled with an electronic drum set, and eventually we've moved to the point where there are no amplifiers on stage, and there's not a guitar amp or a bass amp. Everything goes through the PA. The PA does all the work, and everything is run through the system with digital equipment, using digital modeling of sorts. And we found that has been very successful to us. But when it comes to song selection, I came up with an idea of having a master song list that titles each song along with the artist in alphabetical order. So it's song title followed by artist in alphabetical order. I try and maintain a constant working song list of about 80 songs, thereabouts. And during the performances, before we get going, after we've set up, we'll go around and hand them out to the different tables, put them around a bar, let people mark them off. I'll often get up before we start and I'll tell people, hey, I just handed these lists out. Please mark them off with whatever you have, a pen, a pencil, and give them back to me before we get going, and I'll make sure that we put them on the repertoire for tonight. Now, from that point, I've got a right up front, depending on responses, idea of what the audience wants to hear. We have enough material that's everything from mellow to metal, for example, and we know right up front what the audience is listening for. And then we can cater it towards that. Now, we can, in between, go on autopilot and do some of our own songs, but you have to consider tempo, and sometimes you have to consider key. Sometimes you have to consider who's singing and how many songs. For example, I may be the lead singer of the 3 Fat Cats, but I know for sure I'm not going to get through the entire night without some relief from somebody else. So you have to time all those things out. Where you're going to put somebody else in to give you a little relief on vocals. Okay, all that plays into it. Now, in other bands that we're with, the song list and set list isn't necessarily as diverse, so we have to be very creative, and we can't necessarily solicit requests. So in both of those situations, so we've got 2 situations. For example, 3 Fat Cats, I'll hand out a list that has about 80 songs on it and ask people to choose what you want to hear. You have another band that I might be in and has a fixed set of songs, and although they have some flexibility in the order which they play them, they can't take requests. They're hindered by that. Either way, when you get a request from the audience, and you should be willing to take requests, you'll either be able to play that song for that person, not necessarily right on the spot, but during the night, during the performance, you can cover that, or you won't be. If you can, great. Good. Do it. Sometimes the sooner the better. The situation when you are unable to play it, you now have a couple of options. So here's the second bit of advice. I've tried a couple of different things. Neither one really works better. It really just becomes a matter of monitoring it so nobody abuses it. I've done index cards before where I'll, have a small pile of index cards and I can either hand them out or however they want to do it, and let customers fill in title and artist and send them to us. You could hybridize that. You could pass out a bunch of index cards at the tables and at the bar and ask people to write down what they'd like to hear by title and artist, and then make sure that you take all of those and play what you can off of that, and then select some of the best material that's recommended for future rehearsal and performance. Either way, we're getting back to the feedback loop here. You want your audience to give you guidance as to what they want to hear. Now, strangely, and this is just going to happen from time to time, you might go into a new venue and they might have an entirely different audience, and what you've been practicing all along may not go over well there. That still doesn't diminish the need to get feedback from the audience. Even if you don't have a lot of material that they're familiar with or really aren't into, you can still get requests from them and learn for the next time. At that point, what you're looking to do is get the follow-up gig, be professional, be respectful, do what you can to appease the audience, and then work towards an improvement for next time. We get done with the PowerPoint display here. I'm just going to go right back to the camera. Okay. So I've given you some basic advice here on this. I've given you some insights on some unique stuff that I've done in the past. A lot of it has worked very well, especially the master song list with like 80 songs on it. You pass it out. You get feedback very quickly, and you have more control over it than if just handing out index cards or having some type of booklet or flip notebook or something like that people can write stuff down in. We've had disasters happen with that before. I won't go into any stories, but there have been some people expressing themselves with artist level work in these notebooks, and that's not what you're really trying to get. So if you would like the idea of how I did the master song list, you want to reach out to us, to me directly, by all means, I'm willing to share that setup with you, a boilerplate setup. I'll probably share an older list that we no longer use, but it'll give you the idea, and it's an Excel spreadsheet. I'm more than happy to send that to you in a Excel format, and then you can work on it from there and use your own setup, put your own songs in, but it'll still be a boilerplate you can use. Be more than happy to do that for you. Won't cost you anything. Just let me know. So let me go out here, bring back up the contact information. Again, I'm going to ask you to like, follow, share, and subscribe, comment, contact us, support us, and contribute in any way that you see fit. I want to thank you ahead of time. Facebook, X, and Rumble is TSEGRP. YouTube, TSEDGRP. Instagram and LinkedIn, The Special Educator. Website, tsegrp.org. And, of course, the email host@tsegrp.org. Once again, I'm your host, Tom Hankins, here at The Special Educator, instructor, tutor, consultant, and musician. Until next time, I hope all is well. Stay safe out there. Peace, love, and happiness to you all. Take care now.